recording. Okay. Testing. Okay, I think we're good. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us today. It is like such a special thing to have you in our community. You're our first guest, which is huge. I think it's really helpful for people who have lost a pet to get lots of different insights from, from others, because it's, grief is such an individual experience. And so we have our own thoughts about it. And I have my own thoughts about it, my own experiences about it. But hearing from you too, from others, it just helps give us more information, more ways to cope, and helps us feel less alone. So I'm just so honored to have you. A quick intro about Nick is that he is a clinical psychologist. He's based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He is the founder of a very popular newsletter called The Friendly Mind, which I'll make sure to leave you guys information on how to get his newsletter every week. It's really great. I read it today, so definitely sign up for that. He's a writer. He's been featured in plenty of media outlets like NBC, Business Insider, Inc. magazine. And, his thing is teaching you how to build emotional resilience and reduce anxiety and help you just feel more calm and kinder to yourself, which I think are all connected to things that we need to do or try to do after we've lost a pet. So what we're going to do today, I have some questions. I want to leave like at least 10-15 minutes for anyone who has questions at the end, but you can go ahead and in the chat, if anything comes up at any point, please go ahead and add a question if you have one. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So Nick, thanks again for joining. I'd like to start off just with like a general, what is emotional resilience? Like how would you define it? How would you explain it? What does it mean?
Sure. So thank you for having me on, by the way, Paige. It's really an honor to be with you guys today. I think of emotional resilience a little bit differently than a lot of people do. To me, it means the ability to respond well in a healthy and productive way to difficult emotions. So I think what's key about that is it doesn't mean that you don't have difficult emotions. It doesn't mean you don't have a lot of difficult emotions. And it doesn't mean that you control your emotions really well, right? Or that you do something about your emotions. In fact, responding to difficult emotions well in a healthy way usually means allowing your emotions to just be and to not do anything about them, and instead to control your behavior, either your mental behavior, like your thoughts, or your physical behavior, controlling those in a way that's most adaptive and helpful to you, given the circumstances and your values in the moment. So that's a little bit of a mouthful. But again, emotional resilience basically means responding well to difficult emotions.
I love that. Okay, responding well to difficult emotions. Yeah, I feel like in my experience, when people hear emotional resilient, they sometimes think I have to be strong, right? I can't feel this. When really it's like the opposite. It's letting yourself, maybe there is some strength involved, but it's more about the feelings, letting them move through you, and then maybe controlling more of the thoughts, like you said, and the behaviors.
Yeah, I would say it takes strength to allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling instead of trying to, I kind of think of resilience as it's the midpoint. It's the healthy middle ground between, if you imagine a spectrum, and on two ends of the spectrum are the unhealthy extremes. One is avoidance. That's where you feel bad and you're in denial about it, or you try and stuff down, or you just pretend it's not there. No. We've all been there to some extent. But on the other end of the spectrum, equally unhelpful, actually, is obsession, or getting lost in your emotions, trying, because you think of them as bad or something that needs to be controlled, you get kind of obsessed with them, and you're constantly like trying to manipulate them or control them or get rid of them or analyze them, understand every little thing about them. And getting lost in your emotions can be just as unhelpful as avoiding them. So resilience, to my way of thinking, is the healthy middle ground where you are aware of your emotions, you're listening to them, you're respectful of them, right? But you're not taking orders from there either, right? You're acting on your values, not your emotions. You're listening and respectful to them, but you're not taking orders either. And so you're very aware of them and you're willing to have them. So you're not falling into the avoidance side, but you have good boundaries with your emotions and you're not getting lost in them and overwhelmed by them. So it does take a kind of strength to be able to hold that middle line, especially in the presence of really big, difficult emotions like grief, for instance.
Yeah. Okay. And that brings me to my next question, which is, does emotional resilience look different when someone is grieving? Especially if they're grieving a pet, because that's what people here are doing. So what do you think?
Sure. So I think, resilience on some level always looks different depending on the emotion, depending on the person, depending on the situation. It's always going to look and feel a little bit different. It's really different for everyone on some level. That being said, my experience is that the core underlying mechanics of resilience are the same, regardless of what the difficult emotion is, whether it's anger or guilt or grief or shame or anxiety or whatever it is. You're always in some, another way to think about emotional resilience is you're trying to foster a healthy relationship with your emotions. You're not
Mm,
avoiding your emotions and you're not trying to get rid of them, right? Those are the two ends of the extreme. You're having a healthy relationship with them, even when they're hard, even when they're difficult and painful. And so whether that's anger or anxiety or grief, you're still trying to be in relationship with your emotions. And so I think the core mechanisms are ultimately sort of the same.
So what is a healthy relationship then? Or what are the core
Yeah,
mechanisms?
what does that look like?
Yeah, and
So,
especially when grieving. And I love that answer too, that every situation, emotional resilience looks different, right? I think
yeah.
that's good to remember. Yeah.
So most people get into trouble with their emotions when they do what's called compounding their emotions. Now, compounding your emotions means if you treat your emotion like something that is bad or dangerous or a threat, either because you avoid it and run away from it, or because you try to get rid of it. Either way, what your brain sees is fight and flight. It sees like if you treat something like an enemy, including your own emotions, your brain is going to believe that thing is an enemy. So if you feel sad, but then you start criticizing yourself for feeling sad, or you start telling yourself, "Oh, I can't feel sad." In either case, you're teaching your brain that it's not okay to feel sad, that sadness is a threat. So the next time sadness pops up, you're going to feel sad, and then you're going to feel anxious about being sad or guilty about being sad. And that compounding of emotion makes it much more overwhelming and hard to deal with. This is called the process here is called emotional fear learning. You're
Mm,
teaching your brain to fear your own emotions, which is a setup for emotional struggle and suffering. So my idea with emotional resilience is that by being willing to allow, by listening to and being respectful of your emotions, right, but not getting lost in them, you're training your brain to have a healthy relationship with your emotions, to think of it as a friend. Oh, I call my newsletter The Friendly Mind, because I think the core of emotional health is learning to treat your own inner experiences, like thoughts or emotions or beliefs, especially the difficult ones, like you would a friend, right? And friends, sometimes they are super fun to be around. Sometimes they have to say, give you some difficult feedback. That feels really bad. It feels really uncomfortable, but they have your best intentions at heart. And that is always true of our inner lives, our emotions, our thoughts, our beliefs, no matter how painful, right? They're on our side. They're trying to help us, right? And so remembering to treat our emotions like that, like a friend. Now, maybe the advice isn't especially good. Maybe they're a little misguided, right? That doesn't mean they're not well intentioned, but it doesn't mean you want to take orders from your emotions. If you're really mad and your emotions are saying, like knock that guy out, I don't know if you want to like follow through on that advice, but you still want to be respectful of the emotion. So that's all kind of theoretical. What does this actually mean in practice? I have a little framework that I use. I call it the AVA method. So AVA, like AVA, it's a little memory device. It stands for what I think of as like the three building blocks of emotional resilience. Like if you are struggling with any kind of difficult emotion, including sadness, grief, you could do a lot worse than these three things. The first A is acknowledge. So just really clearly label whatever it is you're experiencing, especially the emotion. And what you want to do is you don't want to intellectualize. You don't want to use big, complicated, highly intellectual, conceptual terms. You want to, as I think of it, say it like a 6-year-old. So I feel sad. I feel mad. I feel scared. Like whatever, just really plain. Okay. This clarity is actually the really important first step, just getting clear about what you're experiencing. So that's the acknowledge. Whatever painful experience you're feeling, acknowledge it. That V is for validate. Validation just means reminding yourself that no matter how uncomfortable or painful some sort of inner experience is, it's not bad and you're not bad for feeling it. Pain is often an indicator that something's wrong, but not always. Sometimes pain's an indicator of something good, of growth. So you don't want to assume that because something feels bad, it is bad, or that you're bad for feeling it. So the validate step is like, okay, I'm feeling really sad. That's the acknowledge. Validation. As awful as this feels, it's okay. It's understandable that I would be feeling this way given this loss I just experienced. Right. And then the second A is act. Act on your values. So this is important because just because you're experiencing something difficult doesn't mean you have to stop and have a therapy session with yourself for an hour. It's okay to, and actually healthy to continue living your life despite feeling, say, sad, or you have a lot of grief, or you're anxious, right? Experiencing a difficult emotion doesn't mean you can't also continue to live your life. And so the second A is a reminder that ultimately, when you decide what to do, it's most helpful to let your values guide those decisions. And by values, it's just what are the things that really matter to you? What are your kind of guiding lights, your ideals? Right? And in general, you want to be aware of and validating of your emotions, but you want to base your decisions based on your values. So in a nutshell, this is like emotional resilience to me. This is the basics of it. Acknowledge how you're feeling plainly, validate that compassionately, and then act on your values courageously. Because it's hard, right? It's hard to keep going when you're feeling something uncomfortable. So sorry, I talked your head off there, but like,
No.
that's it in a nutshell, I think.
I think that AVA, that's so helpful. And something that I'm thinking about as you're talking about this, and the action part, the living by your values. I imagine some of the pet lovers here maybe thinking, one of my biggest values, something that was so important to me, was my pet. Like, how do I act now? What if your values are suddenly up in the air after losing a pet and you don't know what your purpose is, what they are? I'm just curious. I think that might be something that could come up for people. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on if you're feeling lost on that last A section.
No, and I hear that a lot. And so what I would say is you want to make, I think, a subtle but important distinction, which is your values are not things. They're not even important things in your life. Like, I value my wife, but she's not a value, right? Values are things like love, compassion, adventure, romance, curiosity. Like, these are values, right? And so I think while values can change over time, they typically don't change like acutely in response to one event. And if anything, I think grief can be it's a difficult, but one of the lessons you can kind of draw out of grief is that your values actually remain consistent. Like, what part of what was so special about a relationship that you lost, including with a pet, is that was a powerful expression of a lot of your values, right? Say, love, for instance, right? Really common one, right? That was a really powerful way that you expressed love and where you showed love and where you lived out that value. But presumably, that's not the only place in your life where you can live out that value, right? Including, and this can be tough, but including with other pets, for instance, right? Like, I know, like, moving on from grief, whether it's like getting married again, or after the loss of a spouse, or getting a new pet after the loss of a pet, that's hard. We can kind of get into that if you want. But I think values continuity is that, like, you still value love and compassion and excitement and like all these kinds of things in your life. And so those can kind of, in some ways, kind of keep you going through these difficult times.
No, that's I love that. It's true. It's not, I mean, yes, we value our pets, but a pet is not a value. It's really the love underneath, the nurture, right? Loving to nurture something.
Nurture, that's a great value. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's very helpful. Okay. So talking about this AVA process, I know a lot of people, especially right after they've lost a pet, they don't want to be resilient. It's like, I don't want to acknowledge this. I don't want to validate it. I don't want to take action. And so do you have any suggestions for people who may be stuck and they're like, okay, I hear emotional resilience, but I'm not interested. It's too exhausting. I don't want it.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I would say is that I think a lot of people hear resilience, and what gets translated in their head is like, I have to be strong and just like get on with things and like forget about it and like let it go and move on. And um, and again, I don't think that's what resilience is. Like, I actually think resilience is about holding on to that loss. Like, I think healthy grieving is not about getting rid of loss. You will, if you cared about something and you lost it, that's not going away unless you have some sort of neurological condition. Like, you're always going to remember that and you're always going to feel that loss. It is a part of you now. It is not going away. It might become a little bit less painful over time, right? But it is not going away. So resilience is about, in some way, reorienting your life to accommodate this new fact, right? That I do have this loss in my life, and that's not going away. And I still want to continue living my life. Now, this is, maybe medium to long term. In the immediate aftermath of a loss, like, yeah, it's just hard. And like, I don't know that you should be trying to do anything or applying any kind of framework, especially if you're overwhelmed. And like, I think it's very normal in the very initial stages of grief. But at some point, I think it does become about, you're not leaving grief behind. You're not leaving your lost pet, your lost loved one behind. You're trying to figure out, how do I carry it with me as I continue to live my life? So that's maybe it's sort of a reframe of how to think about grieving well and being resilient in the face of those emotions that go along with loss, like sadness, maybe guilt, anger, anxiety, all those things.
Yeah. Or like the resentment too, right? Just like, I don't want it to be going on. Yeah, totally.
Yep.
Okay. I'm glad you brought up the beginning phase of grief too, because I had a question about timelines, and I always feel I feel a little conflicted bringing up timelines, because I know, research, whatever. I mean, there's so much on it, but typically you hear there is no timeline when it comes to grief, right? I mean, you can't just like say, all right, a year is up, I'm done grieving, let's move forward. But, I am curious if you have any thoughts about when a person can start to cultivate resilience. And I don't know if you want to give an exact timeline. And let me see, I had one more. Yeah. And then, are there any moments when a person can or should just like throw this idea of resilience out the window? Which, again, I know you said resilience is not being strong, right? But just, yeah, whatever thoughts you have. Oh no, did we lose you?
No, I'm sorry. Hold on a second.
There's always a technical glitch. I can still hear you. So
Yeah. Okay. Hold on one second. Sorry.
no. Take
let me try. Let me try something.
No worries. And again, if any questions are coming up as we're talking, please feel free. You can add them to the chat, and I can bring them up. So
I'm gonna switch cameras here, Paige. Hold on a second.
okay. Yeah, take your time. No worries at all.
Or would it be better for me to just keep going and forget about the camera? Or do you want me to try and I'm trying to figure out.
Whatever you're more, we can take a little pause for a moment.
If this works.
Oh, you're back.
Slightly new camera angle. Sorry about that.
No, it's great. It still looks great. Yeah.
Okay.
You look the same to me. So, okay. So yeah.
Yeah. So your question about timelines.
Yeah.
Pardon the interruption.
No worries.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is technically, and again, this isn't a rule or a commandment. I would just put it out there as something to like consider, right? Is that I really think resilience is always, like, there isn't a time when it doesn't apply, because again, in some ways, resilience is just the willingness to be with whatever is there. So actually, I think being, resilience, especially in the early stages, probably means being willing to feel all those things that you're feeling. So it's not about being like strong and like moving on or whatever. It's about, no, you know what? I am like heartbroken. I'm devastated. I'm sad. Like, I'm just going to be that. I don't need to be anything else right now. Right. And then it's okay and probably good for me to be those things right now. So so I think that's how I would think about the kind of, is there a time or isn't there a time for resilience? And then, the other thing I'll just say, kind of generally speaking, is that I think in the early stages that we tend for that side of getting lost in emotions in the really early stages of grief. Like that, it's just so overwhelming that I think it's normal to just get fairly light. And, I think you want to be careful of that, right? You don't want to swing too far out on that spectrum. But I think the general process for most people of grief is that you start to move closer, away from that being lost in the grief to it's still a big part of you, and you're still going to get reminded of that frequently, but it becomes less of an overwhelming thing all the time.
Yeah, that's making me think I need to do more research on this to really have it, but I know grief affects the brain, right? And so when you're thinking about resilience and the thinking aspect of it, I think probably in those early stages of grief, your brain is just not able to think as clearly because of how strongly it's impacted by the emotional experience. Does that make sense to you? Again, I feel like I want to do more research on this. I know grief brain is a thing. But yeah, as you were saying, like those early stages, it's like, it is a little harder maybe or it's easier to get lost. Right. And I think it's it's a physiological thing that's happening too.
Yeah. The other thing I would say that a number of clients have said is pretty helpful when I brought it up to them is that we tend to think about grief as something that happens to us and like something we have to endure and like ride out until we kind of get through it. I don't love that way of looking at it. I think it is kind of disempowering and ultimately like just not true when you think about grief. I think of grief as much more of an active process. I think it's something you do. I think you do grief. I think it's a normal part of integrating a loss with your life. And generally speaking, the people who have had, this is going to sound like a strange word, but productive kind of grieving processes, right? Doesn't mean it wasn't hard. Doesn't mean it didn't take a long time, right? But the people who work through grief well, a strong pattern is they kind of take ownership or like authorship over their grief. It's like a story they're writing. It's not a story that's being told to them. So we can get into more details of that if you want, but I think as a general thought, that might be interesting for folks to kind of contemplate or like reflect on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to get more into that if you want to share more thoughts or things that come up for you as this idea of it's because what I just thought of too is I've heard this idea of love, right? Love is a verb. It's something you do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
how grief and love it's like this. I've heard this idea that it's the same thing. Grief is love. It's just in a different form. And so I love this idea of grief is it's something you do. So if you want to share more, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what that looks like, what that means to people.
Yeah, and it's an important part of your life, moment of your life, chapter in your life. And I think but it's not presumably like the last chapter. And so just like, in a story, in a good story or book or a movie or whatever, when something difficult happens to somebody, that is big and it is reflected in the narrative and in how we feel and in the dialogue and everything, right? But that event follows through, like it keeps going. The story continues to build. It doesn't deny what happened, right? But it like carries on. And so I think if you're actively grieving, you're in this chapter where like that's what happened in this chapter of life. And so I think part of the grieving process is being present and being willing to explore and be with whatever's happening in the here and now, but also remembering that like you are the author and like you are sort of writing the story and the narrative going forward. And I think if you're going to be a good steward of your grief and of the person or the pet or the whatever it is that you lost, right? You want to do that proactively, right? You want to have a sense of agency around that. It's not just this like thing that hits you and you have to like hold out, like buckle down and like endure until the storm's passed and then you're good to go. Like that's not how it works. it is, but I think the more we can take, sounds strange, but ownership over our grief and have it be a process we have control over, we have authorship in, we have like we can exert creativity in, we can do lovingly, compassionately. Like I just think that's a really empowering and ultimately kind of hopeful way of doing grief rather than getting through grief.
Yeah, no, I love that. And the other thing I'm thinking about too for pet owners especially is I think we all know that one day this will happen. It's the worst
Sure.
part of having a pet, but and so, there's almost this it's unspoken. Yeah, like this will be a chapter in your life that you will need to
Mhm.
not need to, but you can choose to act when it does happen.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I do want to make sure I'm addressing just a few um, common themes that come up for pet owners. I
Sure.
know, yeah, like one of the big ones, um, a lot of pet owners feel guilt after they lose a pet
Mhm.
because, especially in our community, there are a lot of people who've had older pets that have passed away. They have to be the ones who make the choice to say goodbye. And I know, especially at the beginning, there's just so much guilt and regret. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have brought them to the vet. I made a huge mistake, because you don't know what your pet is thinking. So I don't know if you have any suggestions or ideas of what resilience looks like when a person is really stuck in that guilt or regret
Mhm.
after saying goodbye.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things that come to mind, and this is by no means a complete answer to this question because I think it's a really big question, and frankly, like I'm far from having all the answers on this. It's just a hard question. But two things that I have, in working with folks through grief of a variety of different sorts, I found to be pretty helpful, and that one is sort of to your point, Paige, earlier about like almost like anticipating grief, like they most likely like we're going to outlive our pets, and so anticipating this is a chapter I'm going to come to, and I want to be as prepared as possible for that. Okay? And so part of that might be, I think there's this, because euthanasia is such a difficult decision and process, there's this tendency to sort of like put blinders on and kind of like not go there until the absolute last minute, and then we sort of, and I'm definitely not saying everybody does this, but there can be this kind of like, oh, now I have to do it. And so we just rush through and it happens. Right. So I think part of the guilt can be like, in the looking forward in the future, and this is a preventative thing. I'll get to something you can do afterwards, but like trying to give that its own space it's hard, but to really think through, why am I doing this? To be really clear with yourself about, why am I doing this? Why is this the best option? What values have motivated me to make this decision? What did I consider other alternatives? All this kind of stuff that I know most people do, but again, because there's that pressure to kind of avoid it until the last minute, I think this ends up being, it can be really helpful, but it is emotionally difficult to do. The other thing I will say on the other side of grief after a decision like that, if you are struggling with this guilt, something, and again, this doesn't necessarily happen to everybody, but I think it's very easy to confuse guilt for sadness.
Mm.
So I think there is this phenomenon where a lot of us have, this is a little bit of a crass term, but what I kind of call fake guilt, which it's like pseudo guilt. It's an emotion that's masquerading as guilt, but it's not actually guilt. In my experience, guilt is one of these, it's a very narrow emotion. Guilt is the emotion we feel, and it's an important emotion, and we all have the capacity to feel it, or most of us do. It's where you had knowingly have done something morally wrong. I think for most of us, that's a pretty high bar. Like there aren't that many situations where I know this is the wrong thing to do, and I'm going to do it anyway because I'm selfish or because I'm whatever. Like that just, for most of us, it doesn't happen that much. So what you're experiencing after euthanizing a beloved pet, it's probably a very complex set of emotions. I would be gently skeptical of the idea that it's guilt specifically. There's probably a lot of sadness, right? There's a lot of like what ifing, right? Well, what if I had done this, or should I have considered this, or like, and that again, that's not exactly guilt. I think that's normal after any big decision. It's very human to debrief and try and learn from big decisions so that if we're faced with them in the future, we hopefully have some more info to kind of go on. But again, I don't think that's guilt. And so I would just, I guess my suggestion on this question is be careful of throwing around that term guilt, even with yourself, and maybe try to explore those emotions a little bit more and see if kind of underneath the surface, maybe it's something else going on there.
Yeah, no, I love that. I sometimes think it, and this is in my experience as well, the guilt is almost easier to process, like, oh, I'll just distract myself with this guilt, when really it's that depth of sadness and loss that's underneath.
Yeah, so that's part of my theory on this, is that guilt implies responsibility, which means we could have done something differently, right? We should have done something differently. So it gives the temporarily like kind of illusion of like I could have or I should have done something different. If we feel more in control, whereas sadness, it is kind of a fundamentally like helpless emotion. It's just lost. There is nothing to be done about it, and that's so it's sadness, but it's also helplessness. And if there's like humans hate feeling helpless, we will do almost anything to get out of feeling helpless, including telling ourselves that we're feeling guilty. So again, I'm not saying this happens all the time, but it's a pattern that I've seen frequently enough that I think people should really try to be aware of and watch out for, because it can really, I think it can really interfere with the grieving process.
Yeah. And one thing I just want to emphasize that you said was that guilt is when you do something morally wrong, right? Because
And
the other,
you know it, you did it
and you know it,
deliberately.
right? You did something morally wrong and you know it, because I think the other thing that happens is pets get sick or there are
Mhm.
accidents, and people can feel like, if I just did this one thing differently, then maybe that, right? It's my fault. I'm guilty. But I would say in all of these, almost all of them, all of these scenarios, a pet person who loves their pet did not intentionally do something morally wrong on purpose to their pet, even if there was, God forbid, knock on wood, like a terrible accident or something. So I just wanted to emphasize that too, because I think that's a really helpful reminder. Okay, there's so much. All right, let me
Stuff.
see. Yeah, this is very helpful. I'm like, such smart insight. Okay.
The other thing I would say just on that what
Yeah,
ifing, because I think you had a question about what ifing. So I could talk for an hour just about this one thing, but
yes.
like one thing I would recommend is, as much as possible, do your what ifing on paper. It's a very normal thing to do, to what if after any big loss, especially the loss of a pet or a loved one, or even just any kind of mistake we've made in life. But when we do the what ifing in our head, it goes really fast and it's really easy to spin out of control. But if you confine your what ifing to paper, if you say, okay, I'm going to what if, I'm literally going to do it on paper, I'm going to write them out. Like, what if I had done this? What if I had done this? And that there's a few reasons that's helpful. It slows you down, but it externalizes those thoughts. So they seem less like inevitable and more like, oh, these are thoughts my brain is like suggesting to me, but they're not necessarily the capital T truth of the matter. So
Yeah.
in general, this is pretty good advice for any kind of problematic form of thinking, whether it's worry or rumination or what ifing or self-criticism. Do it on paper, not in your head.
Okay.
Just
I
a
love.
little,
And
yeah,
in our
yeah,
community, I'm trying to do so. We do like some journaling sessions. So
mm,
maybe we'll have just a
yeah,
what if dedication journaling session where people can just. And so you're saying just write out what if my pet never got cancer, like that kind of thing, or what if this didn't happen? Just like answer the what if. Is that what you think would be
yeah.
helpful?
But time box it. Say, all right, like for 15 minutes, I'm gonna go sit down with my journal or just a scrap of paper, right? And I'm just gonna all these like what if, like again, the friendly mind, right? This what ifing, this is my brain. It thinks it's being helpful. I don't think this is actually super helpful, right? But it's trying to help me somehow. And so I'm gonna give it 15 minutes and I'm gonna get it all out. I'm gonna write it on paper. And then I'm gonna kind of close the book on that. And if they pop out throughout the day, I can say, you know what, I've got my time for what ifing. I'll do it then, right? Thank you, brain. I appreciate it. But now, so this is what I mean by like setting good boundaries with ourselves, like healthy
Okay.
boundaries with our own mind.
Yes, the balance. Okay, I love it. This is a great suggestion. Okay, I'm curious to know, if you don't mind answering, if there have ever been moments in your life where you've struggled with this idea of resilience and what you did. And you don't have to give us like the full like
Sure.
version, but yeah, what do you do when you're struggling with it?
Yeah. So when I'm just emotionally upset, like recent times, I was thinking about like my wife and I had a big argument, but it was one of those arguments that we didn't totally resolve, and it just sort of like lingered, and then there was tension, and ugh, I get I get kind of upset just thinking about it. Right? We did eventually get through it. But like in those times, there's a couple things I like to do. The first is, if you can't tell already, like I'm a writing junkie. I think there's something so therapeutic about taking the stuff that's in your head, whether it's an emotion or a thought or a belief or whatever, even a feeling, and getting it down on paper. Could be what you're experiencing, it could be what you're hoping for, it could be what you want to say. But like, it's sometimes when I was a therapist, sometimes I would get out of therapy sessions and I would think to myself, you know what? It actually would have been more helpful for this person to just sit down for 60 minutes with a journal and just like write, just write. Like that would have been more helpful than anything I could have told them in our session. So I'm a big believer in writing, and you don't have to know what you're writing about. Just like free writing, just allow whatever's in your head, right, to come out on paper. I think is so powerful. Um, the other little like tip, another little like acronym I have, I like silly little memorable acronyms, but I call it the three M's. And the three M's stand for move, make, and meet. So in general, when I am going through a difficult time emotionally and I'm upset, one of those three things is almost always helpful. So doing something physical, like walk. I'm like the walking therapy. Like I just walk. No matter what's going on, I am going to be better able to process and handle what's happening if I'm moving. Doesn't mean I'm like rock climbing or running a marathon or something, but I just go walk around the block. You know,
Mhm.
make do something helpful with your hands. Bake a batch of cookies for your next door neighbor. Fix that old leaky faucet in the bathroom. Like whatever. Just do something helpful with your hands. I don't know what this is. I think there's some like deep primal evolutionary psychology behind this, but like it is very, very helpful. And then the last one is meet, which is go have some sort of meaningful interaction with somebody, probably somebody you care about. It doesn't have to be about what you're struggling with. That's key. Like, so if you got hit by a big grief wave and you're really feeling overwhelmed, you could call up a good friend and say, hey, can we like, want to go meet up for coffee? You don't have to talk about the grief. I mean, you can if you want to, right? But it's just about connection. So I think moving physically, um, being helpful with our hands, and connecting with other people, no matter what, I really want to say, no matter what you're struggling with, one of these three things will really be helpful. If you don't know what else to do, like the three M's is a pretty good bet.
Yeah, no, I love those three suggestions, and that you only really need to do one of them.
Mhm.
I know something I've noticed with our members is, especially for the dog parents, like going for a walk can be so triggering, right? But then
Mhm.
you've got two other M's there to kind
Sure.
of work with, which I think is really helpful. And I'm a huge movement person. For me, it's like it's so helpful. So it can be, and eventually people can start to move and do that kind of stuff. So I know I love that. Okay. Are there any signs to look for that someone is beginning to heal from their loss, even if they don't feel like they are?
Okay, so I am going to sort of flip this question a little bit.
Okay, no, that's
I'm
fine.
going to, in a very respectful way, slightly disagree with the premise of the question. And it's not just you. Like I talk like this, everybody talks like this. We use the language of healing to describe emotional struggle. And I'm not sure that's either accurate or helpful. I think, again, as painful and kind of earth shattering as a major loss can be, including the loss of a pet, I don't think that means something's wrong or broken or needs to be, it's not an injury that needs to be healed. It feels extremely painful, right? And it is, but those are not the same thing. I think this is, I'm not just being overly academic here or semantic with my words. I think it actually matters because you, it, a loss is, again, it's not something you like you need stitches for, or you need surgery on, or you need to like put Neosporin and a Band-Aid on. Like, it's not an injury. It's a
Mm,
part of life. It's
mm,
very painful and it's hard, but it's a part of life. So I'm not sure that like healing necessarily is the right or the most helpful way to think about it. I think about it a little bit more in terms of like how do I need to reorient my life or reintegrate my life given this big event that happened, this big loss. It's really in some ways, it's kind of an identity crisis. You've had
yeah.
a loss, and like part of your identity has fundamentally changed and will always be changed. How do you make sense of your life again, given that fact? So I'm not at all downplaying. In fact, I think what I'm saying is actually, in some ways, harder than this idea of healing. Because in a lot of ways, your body heals naturally, right? Or a doctor just does it for you. But this is about like recomposing your life. But again, I think it's really different that I don't have an injury that needs to be fixed or healed, right? Something big has happened in my life, and I need to, you know, kind of refigure my life based on that. And that's a
Yeah.
subtle, but I think important shift. So again, I would just say, I'm not saying this is the truth. Like, I'm saying like, consider it. It's another viewpoint that I don't think is like thrown out very often. But again, in my experience working with folks who are grieving, has generally proved to be pretty helpful, like reframe or at least way of looking at things.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think it hits the nail on the head. I know, like in my experience, it hasn't been a healing, it has been like a reintegration. Like, oh, this is
Mhm.
life now. There's nothing to heal here. It's like, this is like, what does it look like? How does this like move forward now? Yeah, I think that's a really, it's a lot to think about. And I think I agree. I think it is a harder way to think about it, right? It's like, oh, what if I could just heal? That would be great. I could put a Band-Aid on, I could heal the
Yeah.
wound, I could feel better. But this is more like, no, this is just going to be with you now. So how do we integrate it?
And I don't want to avoid your question entirely because it's a really
Yeah.
good question of like, how do you know, right? So I will give you one sign. I'm not saying it's necessarily the case or it's always the case, but something I have noticed in people who are, I think, beginning to reintegrate, say, after a major loss, is this like the one word I would use is willingness. So they
Mm,
are willing to feel whatever they're feeling, and they are willing to live according to their values, to keep living. So, it might be that in the early stages of grief, like you were saying, you're willing to feel all the sadness, but you're not willing to keep going for walks because that's just too hard. That's what you used to do with your dog, right? But I would say once someone has started, even in very small ways, being willing to be open to whatever they're feeling and to be willing to start to do things that are important to them, even when it's difficult emotionally, like that's, um, I feel hopeful for people when they start to get into that stage. It doesn't mean if you're not there that you're not on the right track or something, but like I would look for that.
I love that. I think that's the perfect word to use. Just a simple kind of simple sign, and
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's not
Okay.
the only sign, or it's not. It doesn't have
Right,
to be that way
right.
necessarily, but it's yeah, it's something I
Yeah,
see a lot, and I would definitely look for.
definitely something to think about for sure.
Mhm.
Okay, I have a few more questions before we
Sure.
open up the floor. Let me see. Okay, I do want to talk about this idea. How can people balance holding on to their pet's memory while also opening up their hearts to future pets? I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Mhm. Yeah, this is another hard one, and I feel kind of inadequate to answering this question, but it may be a very very inadequate, but potentially slightly helpful way is that I think there's something really powerful about this. Some of you have probably heard this idea before of like an either or mindset versus a both and mindset. And I think an either or mindset, which is like really common for, I'm a very analytical person. So I'm always like distinguishing things, like chopping things in half and like this, or like making distinctions. But sometimes it's like a both and, it's a together thing. And so I think it's very easy for us to think about, the memory of my former pet and new pet, and that those two are somehow like very separate things that are kind of mutually exclusive. And I'm not saying we deliberately think like this, but I think it's one of those things we fall into thinking like, because it's just how our culture thinks about it, and it's how most people thinks about it, and like whatever, we just fall into it. But I really think, keeping with the theme of like integration, I think the question is like, as difficult as it is, how can I think about living with both of those? Because that the pet I lost is a huge part of me and a huge part of my life. And the desire to have a pet again is also a really huge part of my life. And so honoring both of those at the same time, you can do that. I guess all I'm saying is we're just reminding yourself that that's okay. Because I think that the narrative tends toward splitting, when really maybe it's just helpful to remind ourselves that like both are good and very possible.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I posted about this in my Facebook group. I had an experience where someone asked me about my pets, and I do have 3 new cats now.
Mhm.
Um, and I was like, I was triggered in a way because I wanted to share about Squiggles, like, oh, who are my pets, right? Squiggles, and then these 3 new cats. But it felt weird, but it's true. It's an and. Even though Squiggles is not here, she's still my pet, and I
Yeah,
still have these 3 new cats. It can they can all exist in my heart as part of my life. It's not like, okay, I have 3 new cats now. That's over with.
right.
I think that's a great way to put it. Okay, so I do. If anyone has, people have asked questions. Okay, let me see. Michelle said, I think it's so complicated because we feel responsible, like we are playing God, and it's so hard to wrap your head around. I'm so sorry that I missed this message when what we were talking about. Oh, Jennifer, you said regret. Okay, what are your thoughts on grief mixed in with anger? Anger regarding the way things played out and how to let that go, even after a year, still feeling that way.
So I think, and again, this is maybe going to seem initially kind of academic or splitting hairs here, but I don't think you can let go of any emotion, including anger, because I don't, fundamentally we don't have direct control over our emotions. Like if I tell you right now, be 20% more angry, like you can't. There's no dial for anger, right? If I say like be less sad, you can't just push a button and be less sad. Emotions don't work like that. Right? You can indirectly influence how you feel, maybe by doing certain things or thinking certain ways or having certain experiences, but there's no direct line to our emotions. Now, I say this because I think a lot of people feel a sense of responsibility for their emotions. Like, I feel angry about this loss and I need to let it go. I get where that impulse is coming from, but I want to be careful that, like, I don't think you can do anything about the anger. I think you can acknowledge it, you can validate it, you can be willing to have it, right? But you can't like make it, you can't just like let go of it. What you can do is decide to take control of your attention, like what you choose to focus on and think about and do. That is something you have direct control over, right? So I think when faced with some difficult emotions like regret and anger, like that are associated with the grief, to me, what letting go of those means, I'm not letting go of the emotion, right? I'm letting go of the need to continue right now to focus on those, and instead to put my attention onto something else, ideally something that's informed by my values,
Mm.
right? And it's not that I'm getting rid of the anger. I'm just, it's like going in the back seat, and you can do whatever you want back there, but you're not driving the car. I'm not going to try and throw you out the window. You're in the back seat.
Oh my
Right?
gosh, I love that visual. It's like, yeah, the anger is going to be there. Like what happened makes sense that you would be angry, but
It's not. It's not my image actually. This comes from Liz Gilbert, the author of Eat,
oh,
Pray,
I love
Love.
her. Yeah.
She has this thing about like the fear monster when she's trying to do something creative. The fear monster tries to come on and like take over the car, and the temptation is to like throw it out the window to get rid of it, right? But you can't do that either. You can't let the fear monster drive. You can't try to throw it out the window, right? The trick is to let it come along for the ride, but that it's a passenger. And so I
Yeah.
think the same with those secondary difficult emotions like anger, regret, things like that. You get into trouble when you either let it drive or you try and throw it out the window. And I think
Mm.
instead, and I know this is all very metaphorical, but I would take it back to the Ava method. Acknowledge the anger, validate it. Like it makes sense on some level that I'm feeling angry right now and that I still feel angry, right? And then refocus on like what do I want to do? Like what are my values, right? And how do I want to live moving forward?
Yes, it's so intentional to think of this AVA method. And I again, that like throwing it in the back seat, I can picture that. I love a metaphor. Okay, that must have been, was that from Big Magic? That, because I love that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a great
I
book.
have it on my shelf over there.
Yeah,
It's
awesome.
amazing. But yeah, I love her. Okay, I want to, and if anyone else has a question, please post it. Oh, thanks. You'll always be Squiggles mom. Thank you, Michelle. I know. But yeah, post any questions. There is someone that left a question who wasn't able to attend.
Sure.
And that is, let me see. How can someone tell if they're finding a healthy balance from feeling sadness and moving forward? I feel like you've been talking so much about this kind of idea of balance, but if you could answer that specifically.
I think I would almost kind of invert it and say you want to, instead of looking for balance, like look for imbalance. Like, you're kind of maybe veering in the wrong direction when when your motivation is to get rid of a feeling. Like, I need to cope with this sadness and feel less sad. Like, no, you don't cope with emotions. You cope with problems, right? Emotions are not problems to be coped with. They're part of our experience, however painful, right? So that desire to get rid of, right? That motivation, however natural, you want to be careful of that. And also the desire to ignore or like deny or distract from, also unhelpful. But again, willingness is like the middle ground where I'm willing to have this thing and I'm moving forward, right? Not moving beyond. They're in the car with me, right? They're coming with me. All this hurt, all this pain, the anger, the sadness, the grief, it's coming with me, right? And I'm moving toward like what I want in life, toward my values, toward what really matters to me.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. Pay attention to the imbalance as well, because that's a sign that.
Yeah, but gently, non-judgmentally, like it's natural, right, to want to get rid of these things that are painful or to avoid them or pretend like they're not there, right? But just watch out for those.
Yeah.
If you see, when you notice them in yourself, gently be like, okay, I get it, right? I get, brain, that you want to get rid of this feeling because it's uncomfortable. But it's okay. I know it's just another part of my brain, like trying to help me in some way. And I'm going to refocus on what matters to me right now, like what I really want, my
Yes.
values.
Yes, values. Okay, I'm very inspired. I love doing values work, and so after this talk, I'm gonna make sure in our community we bring that more into.
I think it's so underappreciated in so many aspects of emotional health, but grief in particular. And again, I think it's because people do this either or thing. Like, I either have to be focused on what I lost, or I'm gonna like move on and like go toward my values. Nonsense, right? That you can do both, and I would argue you should do both. You honor what has been and what you've lost, and you bring it with you while you move toward what you want and what's really important to you.
Yes. So this has been such a good reminder. Okay, last question from someone that couldn't attend.
Sure.
Why does it sometimes feel like our pets were not real, or we feel so disconnected when looking at photos? I don't know if you have any answers to this, but figured I'd throw it out there in case you.
I think there can be a lot of things. One explanation for this that I know definitely happens is it's kind of it's a defense mechanism. So where if something feels really upsetting, you sort of it like numbs out, right, to make it less painful. And that can come from a variety of places. It's often learned from a really young age. But I think my take home on that is, like, if you notice that happening, don't worry about it. This is what people experience this, and they're like, oh my God, like, what's wrong with me? I'm like, I feel so detached. Like, am I not grieving well? No, like, this happens relatively frequently. There's a lot of ways that people deal with grief, a lot of different manifestations of it. And so this is really common. I mean, be aware of it. If it starts getting like dramatically worse or something, like, be thoughtful about that. But it's no reason to immediately hit like, the emergency button and like something's wrong. It's a part of things. And again, it's okay. It's your brain trying to help you and trying to protect you. It might not be the most constructive way to actually move through grief, but your brain has your best intentions at heart, and it's good to remember that in the moment.
Yes. Oh, the friendly mind. I feel like just after this talk, my mind is going to be much friendlier. so good. Okay, we have 2 more minutes, and so I do want. I'm going to use up all the time that we have with you.
Let's do it.
Okay. There was another question that I wanted to ask, really quickly. Okay. Do you have any daily practices or tangible actions that someone can do to cultivate resilience while they're grieving a pet? That's the last thing. Just anything tangible, any last little nugget that you can leave us with.
Yeah, so there's an exercise called scheduled sadness. It's a variant of, I'm primarily an anxiety expert. Like that was my thing, was treating anxiety. And one of the arguably the most powerful ways to deal with anxiety is a practice called scheduled worry, where you block off a certain amount of time, right, each day, and you get a pen and paper and you write down everything you're worried about. And after your 10 minutes, your 15 minutes, this is the best part, you crumple it up and you throw it away. You don't analyze the worries. You don't like look for meaning in them. You just throw them away. It's about deliberately approaching those things so that you teach your brain they're not dangerous. They're actually friends, right? My mind is trying to help me. And over time, they become less intrusive and less painful. Now, you can apply the same principle to sadness, which I think for grieving is like arguably like the core emotion, some version of sadness. And by making a practice where you deliberately approach sadness, you decide every evening from 7:30 to 8, after I finish cleaning up after dinner, but before I watch TV or whatever it is, I'm going to sit down for 15 minutes and I'm going to write down what I'm sad about, what emotions I'm feeling, what memories come up for me, whatever it is, right? And then when you're done, you're done. You don't analyze it, you don't keep it, I mean, you can if you want, but like the point is you are approaching and showing your brain that sadness isn't bad, that it's normal and it's okay. And the result of that is you're going to have way less of what tends to make grief especially hard, more hard than it needs to be, which is compounded sadness. It's where you feel guilty about feeling sad, or you feel angry about feeling sad, or anxious about feeling sad. So I think that's it also can help you generate insights into your grief, right? And into your values, actually. There's so much in there, but that's a really pretty straightforward practice. I would really encourage it, and do it for a week. Try for a week, right? Try for 30 days. It doesn't have to be forever, right? But it's a pretty simple, straightforward practice just about anyone can do.
Yeah, I love that. Just okay, scheduling the time that you.
Scheduling time to be sad.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. This has been so wonderful. I feel like I've just learned so much from you. I'm so grateful that you joined us. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome,
And
Paige.
thank you everyone else who's here, which I can't really see.
Thank you
Um,
all. Great
Jennifer, that's
questions.
so very helpful. Yeah, it was an honor to have you, and we should definitely stay in touch. I'll make sure to share all of his information in our community so you guys can get his emails and everything. So, okay, have a good night. Thank you again. Have a good night, everyone, and I'll see you all very soon. And take
Thanks,
good.
Paige.
Okay, talk soon. Thank you so much, Nick. Bye. Just want to make sure I'm ending the recording.